Welcome back to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. Michael, it is a pleasure to have you back on the show. Now, it's been 2 years since we last talked, so you might have to reintroduce yourself to everyone out there listening.
Not a problem. Hey, thanks, Rob, for having me back on. My name is Michael Rovito. I'm an associate professor at the University of Central Florida in the Department of Health Sciences. I'm also the founder and the chief programs officer for the Male Wellness Collective, which is a 501(c)(3) nonprofit charity organization based in Orlando, Florida.
Can you please tell me more about the Male Wellness Clinic or just organization?
Yeah, sure. So what we try to do at the Male Wellness Collective is we're trying to um, humanize or just reimagine how men are showing up in the world. We're trying to humanize their experience. And why we say that is, I guess we'll get into this a little bit later with the podcast with mental health, but as men, we're kind of like, um, we're casted into a certain role when we're born. And um, because of the social structures that are in place, men and boys tend to manifest behaviors and outcomes, or manifest behaviors and their subsequent outcomes because of those behaviors. And we're trying to change that up. We're trying to say whatever we think is working is not really working because men and boys are living sicker and dying younger. So we got to call a timeout and really, call an audible and figure something else out. So we're trying to reimagine how they're showing up in the world. We're trying to humanize their experience. And so what we do is we offer unique programming to kind of rehumanize them, if that's a odd term to use. We offer this unique programming to kind of allow them to reinvent themselves and allow them to kind of show up better in the world around them. And also, besides that programming, we offer um, more or like research heavy stuff. We're looking at big data and trying to figure out trends and what's been produced out there. And we collect our own data too, but so we have more of a programming arm and more of a research arm.
Can you tell me a little bit more about the research arm of it? Like what types of things are you guys examining and looking at?
Sure. My wife Kathy is more the um, she's that side of the house, but I'm on the programming side of the house. But I mean, we both do research. We're both professors, but with MWC, so we call it. Her what she shepherds is a lot of it, not all of it. A lot of it is based in social connectivity between men and themselves, men and each other, and men in society. A lot of it is rooted in that, like loneliness, isolation, which again, I guess relates back to male mental health. So a lot of it is rooted in that. We also look at stuff like access to healthcare, access to services, the want and need for services, but a lot of it is based in social connectivity. So we'll ask guys about, are you isolated? Are you lonely? What are your connections like? Yeah, that kind of stuff, because we're trying to figure out just how lonely and isolated men are, which tends to be very comparatively, but most of it's based in that. So we're looking at secondary data, what's been produced at the state or county or local or the national level, even international. And then we collect our own data. We usually do that through surveys and focus group.
Is there a lot of available data out there because of the fact that it's in society? I mean, I hate to say it, but it's not a popular topic to be talking about male mental health. I think it's slowly changing with the newer generations. I think, like with my nephews and around their age ranges, you see them talking more about their feelings, which I think is very important. But for the longest time, it was men didn't really have this kind of emotional side. And if you did have trauma, it was kind of burying it deep down. PTSD research has really excelled and opened up that discussion. But I mean, I hate to say it, if you go around saying you're a male mental health advocate, people kind of scoff at you. At least I've noticed in my experience.
Yeah, and yeah, there's work out there on depression and anxiety a little bit, and um, a lot of it is a lot of it is like after the fact. It's a lot of it's like downstream stuff. It's kind of like this many men are depressed, and that many guys are anxious, and this many guys have PTSD. And that's all great. Like we need to know the prevalence of this stuff, like where they're at, who's more depressed, who's more anxious, and who has PTSD and all that stuff. And the big statistic is they'll always say is guys are 3 to 4 times more likely to commit suicide. However, though, 3 to 4 times more women try to commit suicide. We're just more successful at it. Sounds like a morbid way of putting it, but that's one of those statistics that are always thrown out there, and that's fine. I mean, it's a bad statistic, of course, it's terrible, but it's fine that that statistic's out there. All these things are good to have. However, the data that does not exist out there are like, okay, well, what's leading to depression, and like what's leading to anxiety, and like what's leading to the PTSD or the suicidal tendencies or the actual suicide itself? Like, what are these things that are leading up to that point, the more upstream stuff? And there's not a lot of data on that. There's some anecdotal stuff, there's some like little things here and there, but there's not one huge thing out there that we can kind of point to and say, aha, there's a huge amount of data that says exactly this, that these guys have been isolated since they were kids. They're not shown love and affection. They start to grow defensive, and they grow aggressive, and they see everything as a threat. And then because of the threat, they kind of feel unsatisfied, and they try to fill the unsatisfaction with vices, drugs, alcohol, thrill seeking, risky sexual behaviors. They have to show up in the world, aggressively, and like that's more like my inward dialogue outwardly. But like I want to get to that kind of data. Like, why are they committing suicide and why are they depressed? And our hypothesis is our work, like my work specifically with the nonprofit, because my work with the university stuff is a bit different. I look at cancer survivorship, but with men, and like, let's see, we're interested in that kind of stuff, the more upstream stuff. Like, how are these boys, like, what kind of world are they born into? And then what kind of man or boy is being produced because of the world they're being born into? And I think we need to address that, like our expectations of men, the social constructs that define men and boys as they're very, very young, like literally almost like postnatal, where we throw a blue blanket on them and then it's all downward from there. And I'm not, discounting blue blankets and that kind of stuff. However, though, there is this expectation that men are this, boys are this, and girls are that, and women are this. And that bifurcation that we set out literally the first week of life, it seems trite, and it seems a bit like, well, come on, Michael, give him a break. Well, I don't know. Like the expectations that we place upon these men and boys, literally from the moment of life, I mean, it does have repercussions, more so down the line, but it starts literally at birth.
Do you think it would change depending on if the child had siblings or not? Usually, like if you look at the older brother, I would put there's a lot more stress focused on them to be the more masculine culture, I would say, which is that you have to seem strong in front of your younger sibling. But also, what would you consider the most important in a child's development when we talk about kind of like the issues that lead to later male mental health issues? Like we talk about things like teachers or educators or other people, societal factors that start playing in, where, well, boys play in the dirt. That's what they do. These types of things that you hear all the time and like fighting all the time. Well, that's a male thing to do. Well, okay. Well, what else are we doing in that same category that starts to label them as like, don't talk about your feelings. That's not a male thing to do. And eventually you get to a point where you do have these, we're going to say unalive for the suicide thing, just because I don't know how YouTube handles that, but they start getting these statistics of a lot of males that do this unalive thing because of the fact of all these past notions that have been ingrained in them since they were children.
So, all right, your first question was about siblings,
I
and
asked like 30.
that's okay. No, 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 it's a nice train of thought. Yeah, like just besides the whole male thing, there's a great book by Jonah Berger. Actually, I have it right here. I teach it. I promote my classes. I use it in my class. It's called Invisible Influence, and you really can't see it, but it's called Invisible Influence by Jonah Berger. It was written maybe 5, 6 years ago. It was pre-COVID stuff, but um, he talks about these hidden forces that shape our behavior, and one of the chapters talks about, sibling, like sibships. So, do you have brothers and sisters, and like in what order, and in what order you're born in kind of like influences how you act and what you become. And it tends to be like the older child, male or female, they tend to be more academic, more responsibility, more like parental than the younger ones. If a younger child is born, like the younger brother or sister, they tend to be more athletic. They tend to be a little bit more risk taking, a lot, and that stems from either them wanting to differentiate themselves from the older brother or sister, and them kind of like having a different parental experience as the older brother and sister did. Maybe the mom and dad kind of like, downshifted to neutral a bit instead of being on, uh, uh,
Well, it goes from so much attention towards the first child, and then the second child's born, then a lot of the attention gets leaned off of the first child onto the second one.
I mean, I see it like in my wife and I, we have two children, and our oldest child, she had a different experience than her younger child. And it's it it it's weird and funny and also kind of like eyebrow raising how parents just switch it up. It's like they have these expectations about what parents should be and what they ought to be in their first kid. But when you start practicing, though, again, this ties back to these expectations we have in society of like what parents should be, what men should be, what women should be. We have all these preconceived notions about what should happen, these shrink wrapped Barbie doll like boxes that we should be like this. And parenting kind of sucks at times, and you don't know what to do. You're kind of, I don't know what to do. I literally am covered in every single like bodily fluid. Like, do I yell? Do I get mad? Do I call for help? Do I just laugh? Like these things that you never find yourself in, you find yourself in, and you don't know what to do. And you think you should be like this, but in reality doesn't quite mix it up. So anyway, when the first child comes along, you have all these expectations about what it should be, and but in practice, it doesn't work out that way. When the second kid comes along, you're like, yeah, homie's not going to warm up the wipes before we wipe the kid's butt. Like, we're not going to do that. That's just like a complete waste of time. Like, to have a wipe warmer, like you laugh at the stuff you used to do. And it's kind of like, I'm not doing that. So, like, our second kid, no, she didn't get no warm wipes on her butt. You know what I mean? So, like, you kind of alter. So, the second kid does have a different experience. But again, going back to your question about this, the older brother, what does that bring into the expectations? Well, yeah, there is that whole thing that the older brother or there is that added burden of like you need to be more responsible. If your dad dies, you're the man of the house. I've been told that. I was the youngest kid, but I was the only bro, like the only son. My mom was like, oddly, I don't know why we had these conversations with like a 10-year-old, but I did. And something ever happened to your dad, you'd be the man of the house. I'm like, I'm 10. Like, what the hell does that mean? Like I'm 10, like I'm 12, like. And a lot of parents have that. They say it in passing. A lot of parents will say, "Oh, I was only joking. Oh, that's innocent. Oh," but I don't know, man. You tell it to a 10, 12, 15-year-old, they don't really perceive it as being joking. They kind of like, they're like, you know what, you're right. And that's a heavy thing to tell some kid that's developing mentally, developing emotionally, developing socially, developing spiritually or sexually. It's like weird to tell these things to these kids because it's very confusing. Like, how do I become a breadwinner or a protector? And I'm, sprout my first pube kind of thing. How do you do that? You know, I mean, be honest, like you have these 15-year-olds, they're walking around, their mom is telling them, like, you're the man of the house, your dad's away from work, so you're the man of the house now, or dad tells them that. And the 15-year-old kind of internalizes that. And, a lot of it, there's that, and when you're an older brother, there is this whole like I'm protector. I need to, be aggressive at times. And again, it's a role that we cast these kids into. And we shouldn't be going like this. Like, what happened? I'm like, you are the director. You cast these people into these roles. Do not be surprised when they start playing them out on camera. I mean, you wanted a tough, aggressive, non-crying man. You got one. And with that, though, there are other negative things that comes from like not affectionate. It's from distance, or they're distant, they're unemotional, they're like automatons, a lot of them. And you can't complain about that when you wanted something that, anyway, but it's that role that we play. But yes, we do have expectations for older brothers, and it does affect the rest of the dynamic of the family. But anyway, sorry for the tangent.
No, a lot of people overestimate, I think, the male's idea or resiliency, I should say. This whole thing is he's a male, he can handle this information, or he's going to be a man one day. I mean, it's been troped in like every Hollywood movie, but it happens for real when a dad tells or a mom tells a kid something that maybe they're a little too young to hear, but oh, he's going to be a man one day, he needs to hear this. And they just say that. I think we over kind of expect what the kids' resiliency is. And next thing you know, these kids have their childhoods ripped away from them. I mean, a lot of my grandparents, for instance, had to grow up very fast. So you didn't have the chance to be a kid. And at this point now, we do live in, as much as people complain about, a time of prosperity. You know, you're not starving to death. At least some people are not starving to death when it comes to being able to go to the grocery store and get food. It is expensive, but you can go there and get something. A lot of people have homes that they can live in. There are people without. But when you really examine these factors that were different 200 years ago or 300 years ago, I don't understand why nothing has really changed. Why don't we have a lot of major programs out there and people aren't screaming off the roof of their lungs talking about male mental health or other types? I mean, we're now starting to talk about mental health, but it's severely slow progress.
Well, I mean, I don't think it would be, and I'm not quite sure what language you use here, but when it comes to um, mass tragedy events like the Columbine, Sandy Hook, Pulse kind of stuff, if you look at that profile of the person committing that, I mean, who is it? A detached, isolated, poor mental health young man. I don't know of one other event, and I'm sure there's probably like, well, there's this event. Okay,
It's most of the time it's males that are committing it and they look like they're severely just broken people.
and they're young though. They're not. There's that one guy from Las Vegas who was older, but I mean, most of it are like, I mean, I'm 43. They're younger than me. They're like 20, 18, that kind of stuff. And uh it's there's this, I'm sorry if I'm deviating from like what you're trying to get at, but you know, it wasn't until like events like that started to like, oh, like now we're at the point now that there's like a mass tragedy event and you're kind of like, oh, okay, today's Tuesday. It's like it's not like people don't care. It's just like you hear it so much, it's kind of like almost sadly, very sadly, become commonplace where people don't even, you know, with the Columbine thing, I was in high school, you can still name those guys that committed that. Like I still know the names of those people, like because it was like, oh my God, what just happened? But now at the past five mass tragedy events, can you name anybody that committed them? I mean, it's hard. It's just become so commonplace. But I think, and this is one facet, the amount of those events that are happening, you could be so detached, but there's been so many of those. I think that that was helpful in pushing mental health a little bit higher on the agenda of what we're looking at, what we're funding, what we're trying to research and trying to figure out. But it's sad though that it's taken all this kind of activity to kind of get it to this at least mediocre level of conversation. And there are other factors, of course, that played into it. But from my perspective, it's the amount of mass tragedy events that have occurred that spurred people to kind of start talking about male mental health. And that's sad though, because it shouldn't have to get to that point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be a fear too, like everybody's gonna who's a male is gonna turn into some shooter. I hope that's not the fear of it. It's just there's a lot of people out there that end up doing a horrible act to themselves because they just feel like they can't be heard and they don't ever really show it because we're told not to show it.
Well, exactly. I mean, I would gather all males have some sort of trauma, little t or big T, and we're not really told or taught or shown how to deal with that trauma. Again, little or big T trauma, and we just internalize it. I was flipping. I try not to scroll because I maybe just real quick. Social media is like not bad. People like demonize social media, and it's not bad. It's not. It's the amount of time that you spend doing it. It's like it's like anything. It's like little doses are fine. But anyway, so I try to kind of keep control my scrolling. Like I'll take like a 5 minute break, and it's funny, and I'll go back to what I'm doing. When you doom scroll for 2 hours, that's the issue. But I saw one thing yesterday, and I don't know if I sent it to my wife, but when we see these things, there was this concert. It was like doom metal, like scream metal kind of a thing, and it was a concert, and there was a mosh pit, and it was these guys just going at it. I don't know if you've ever been to a mosh pit before. Well, since my younger days, you can get hurt if you get whipped, but these guys were doing the mosh, and they were like, aggressively swinging and ducking, and and just getting their rage out, and guys running across the stage and like kicking and stuff, and not each other, but just in the air. And if people don't know what a mosh pit is, just Google mosh pit, MOSH, and look it up. But what the caption was, they're like something like what men do when they were told that or how men deal with their inner issues because they don't want to go to a therapist. And I kind of smirked and chuckled, but then I thought, man, that's really sad. I was like, is that what it is? Is that what we do? Is that it? And I watched the reel like 10 times, and you see these guys. And again, I've been in mosh pits before, and like now I look back and like, man, Jesus, it is a very aggressive scene. Not at each other. It's not like you're going to UFC cage matches and watching this bloody each other, but they're like in their own element, and they're connecting with the music, and they're just letting it all out. And if you turn the music off and you just watch them move the way they are, you'd think, what's wrong with that dude? But like, is that a way of them getting out all this stuff? Because no one's addressing this. No one's talking to them and saying, hey, bro, like what's going on? Like it there. And when I was looking, I laughed, but then I got a little bit sad because I'm like, my God, that might be true. We're not catering these men, and they're either taking it out in a mosh pit, or taking it out on themselves and in bad ways. It could not just be drinking, drugs, risky sex kind of a thing. It could be negative self-talk, internalizing all this, getting to the point of unliving, you know.
Well,
So because we're not addressing it, it's just manifesting in very, very bad ways.
take that same clip you watch of them in a mosh pit, a bunch of people run around just doing a mosh pit style thing, and you go, those guys are having fun. Most guys look at it and be like, hell yeah, before that little end clip pops up. But then take that frustration that they're getting out and put one of them individually in a therapist's office and have that on video for someone to scroll through on Facebook Reels. And a lot of guys would say that's just pathetic, even though they might be feeling like they need to talk to somebody about something. But we haven't made an environment necessarily where it has dropped or gone into the male standards. You talk about walking into a therapist office as a man, a lot of people won't even make it through the door. A lot of people don't want to seek help, especially on the male side of things, because it's different talking about your feelings. They've never made it acceptable.
Going on that, yeah, you're right. Um, we have to make it an experience that can relate to men. I've been in therapy, different therapists. I've had good and bad experiences with it. Um,
I've had nothing but bad ones, and that's why I don't go.
yeah, see, like there was one dude, he was cool because, he just like listened, and I just got a chance to get stuff off my chest, and it was pretty cool. But then I had some ones where I'm kind of like, at this point, I'm kind of like, I'm learned. Just because I've been around the block a lot. And so I'm sitting there talking to this person. I'm like, I could do this myself. Like she's talking to me and I'm trying to connect. And she's like, asking me, so what was your mom like? I'm like, come on. I'm like, I'm not trying to find my mommy issues. I know I have something. Like, let's get beyond this. But anyway, I did have one bad experience, and it relates to what you're saying about how it doesn't connect and how men feel like weird going in. So I went to couples therapy. God, what is this now? 2024. So I'm almost 17 years ago. And I was going through a pretty bad breakup, spiraling kind of out of control. And I was like, you know what? I initiated, I was like, let's go to couples therapy just to see what's up. And that was pretty big of me, not just myself, because I was very anti going to whatever, but, I was just society didn't really read that, particularly in young couples. So I went and um, let the other person talk, sat there kind of like seething because you just know things that are misconstrued or whatever. And I look back now, I'm like, well, that just might be her perception of stuff, or but a lot of it was lies. But anyway, that's besides the point. But then it was my turn to talk. And then I started going. I was trying to play the role, not trying to be the male aggressor, trying to be considerate. And I sat there and I listened. And it was hard for me, but I listened, let everything get out, the lies, the truth, the whatever. And then when it was my turn to talk, the other person was interjecting, I can't believe you did this, crying. And I was like, but then the therapist said this to me. She goes, Michael, do you see how you make her feel? She's crying now. Do you see what you did to her? I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. What? And I was like, you know what? It's time to go. And I just left. And that was my experience with that. So that was just my anecdotal experience. Now, I'm not saying all therapists are like that. I am not saying couples therapy is like that. I'm just talking like that was my experience with uh couples therapy, and I had that unique experience. I'm going to say unique because I don't know. I'm not speaking to all therapists, but that was my experience as a man in couples therapy with a therapist. It was not an environment that was conducive to like hearing about, and like I was just like finger pointing, and then I was like, you know what, I was like Cartman, like screw your guys, I'm going home, kind of a thing. Just left, and if I didn't have, this sounds really conceited, if I didn't have the emotional intelligence to kind of say, you know what, that's probably just a bad apple. It's not going to ruin the whole bin. I would have internalized that. I would have went out. I would have become like the anti whatever. I would have been like very disgruntled, but I didn't because I gave the benefit of the doubt. But a lot of guys aren't like that. A lot of guys aren't really trained to be that way. A lot of guys are not allowed to have that higher level thinking. So a lot of them do internalize it. A lot of them do kind of rebound and get more negative with it. But there are those experiences in therapy where it's just not conducive to a man being there. They don't feel comfortable being there. They may have these bad experiences like that, and they're probably never going to go back.
Well,
And so that,
do you think men need therapy, or do they need something like a group of other male friends that give them the same exact thing, sometimes even better stimulus? I mean, I've noticed that I've had better, relieved moments when you're in that depressing spiral where a therapist that's there for the money and trying to diagnose problems and connect lines that maybe don't need to be connected, maybe from my perspective and their perspective might be different. But also a group of friends that just sit there and hear you talk. That's all men need. They just want to feel like someone heard them at a point. Doesn't even need to give them a response or anything. Just be here. Let me vent my frustration out. Let me vent how work has beat me down. Let me vent how I'm obsessed with this. I'm working so many hours. I'm sleeping all day, because I'm so tired. I can't see my family because I'm sleeping so I can get back up and go to my next shift. That's all they need. And if you give that to them or get a program going where the bunch of male friends, a bowling league, these types of things that people consider trivial and just nonsensical if you're not interested in bowling, those are some of the most best moments of that person's life. And it might sound sad, but it's because they get to express themselves and talk about their day, really not to someone that they're supposed to love, but just someone that will, yeah, man, I get it. That sucks, dude. Tell me it sucks. But we don't really have stuff like that. I mean, people can do that on their own. I'm curious what programs you've tried to think about developing or maybe have developed that can kind of bring this together when it comes to a bunch of people being able to vent their frustrations. I think men on men communication, despite, if they know each other or not, more guys are pretty open to talking to another person when they're going through some shit.
yeah, it's funny you bring that up. Our flagship program is something called Connex. It's CONNEX. Um, so again, back to our ethos, whatever, our mission, vision type thing. I can never get those things right when it comes to like organizational development. I'm like mission, vision, impact, objectives, short circuit. Like I never can quite iron those things out. But
We have a mission
um,
statement somewhere.
yeah, I know. And I'm still kind of like, is that the vision? I don't even know. But so part of our ethos is, again, we're trying to reimagine how these guys are showing up, right? Trying to humanize their experiences. And so I was like, we need to really focus on what you're saying, um, connection. And our flagship program is Connects. And it's exactly what you're saying. We did a feasibility thing where like, would guys even show up to this? And they were. And we had focus groups on like what they want, what they didn't want, how to look, feel, you know. And we're about to launch this summer the formal membership. Now, it's going to be monetized, but it's not for making profit. We're a nonprofit. All the membership fees that we're getting from it are going to be going into like paying for the practitioners, like where the experience is. Now, let me explain real quick. So, what this experience is, the Connects membership is, it's uh we're gonna have 2 events a month baseline, and we're gonna have quarterly events. It's like an extra experience, and then once a year event. So you've like 24 touch points, 28 like 30 touch points during the year where you and other members can show up and connect. Now, the events are, we have 3 core ones. And the reason why we kind of chose these is partly it's selfish because what I like to do and what other guys, where I like to see men go, where we would like to see men go. So it'd be yoga, breath work, hiking, or we like rucking, weighted backpacks. That's like the 3 core things. And so there's also other events like we'll go to coffee shops, or we'll go to like rock wall climbing. We'll go to go eat dim sum. We'll go to some art exhibit, and other things we have planned is like qigong, things like that are like outside the norm, trying to reinvent how men are showing up. We've went through testing and feasibility and all these events, breath work, rucking, the yoga, other oddball things, and we had some very positive feedback. Now, yeah, it's going to be kind of eyebrow raising for some guys. Are going to say, what the hell is qigong? But once they get in, they're like, damn. Once they had breath work event, they're like, I had no idea you can clear your sinuses by breathing through your one nostril and doing blah 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 blah. I'm like, yeah. There's like these sound bowls where you go into this room and someone plays like one of those sounding bowls, and it's odd what happens. Like the sound vibrations, I forget the hertz coming off it, but like it's like this buzzing sound, but you almost get into a trance state. I'm not a tinfoil hat wearer. I'm not one of these like, like everything's peace kind of people. But like when you go into these rooms and you hear that sounding bowl and the vibration, you kind of get into a trance, and it's pretty freaking cool. So we're gonna have those experiences for guys. And so we're also launched a membership. It's for the whole year, it'd be $100. Again, it sounds a little bit cost prohibitive, and yeah, but it's actually cheaper than if you go to Planet Fitness per month. It's less than $10 a month just to be part of this programming. Planet Fitness is like, come on, bro. But like it's even less than that. $100 for all those events. I mean, it's we're making no money off that. Of course not. This just goes all into programming to pay for their yoga practitioner and breath work. But again, back to your point, we want guys to get together and have shared experiences that are different, that are unique, and that could actually cause you to have this kind of like immersive, like higher level experience. Like if you go to yoga or you go to sounding bowl or you're on a walk in the middle of nature and you're like, man, shit, there's an otter right there. The last rock we went on is we're in Florida, a bunch of gators swimming around, like 2 or 3, they're 10-footers. You had these like little otters that were just jumping in and around these gators. Gators didn't move. I'm like, look at that. They're like, whoa. And so it sounds kind of silly, but when you're standing there, it's like 8 in the morning and you're watching this unfold, and you're seeing these 10-foot gators just standing there stoically, just chilling, and these big ass otters just jumping around. I'm like, where do you see, like, where are you going to see that? Like real life. And so these guys are just like, I'm like, and we're laughing. I'm like, that's what guys need. Guys don't need like Vicodin or I, I'm not saying don't use
I get it.
meds
Yeah.
if you prescribe them,
Yeah, it
but
shouldn't be
guys
the
many
only
times,
thing.
exactly, guys maybe don't need the Zoloft. Maybe they just need to laugh and like step in some like deer shit and like laugh about it with everyone, like, oh, you stepped in shit. But like we all laugh and it's funny, and like you could see like the malaise like lift off their skull for at least a fraction of a second. I'm like, you know what, that guy probably didn't laugh like that in about 20 years. That guy probably didn't enjoy himself like this, unplugged from his phone for about 5 years. That guy just had a conversation with a random dude about God or about taxes or about fucking, oh, I'm sorry, about,
You're good.
like
You can say that.
about like nacho cheese recipes or something like that. But like, and they talked about it for 45 minutes. I'm like, how do you talk about nacho recipes for 45 minutes? I don't know, but I'm glad you had that experience. And they, it's that bonding and that connection in however weird way that you kind of manifest that. And I think that's what we need. That's a curative thing. That is an upstream thing that we need to start addressing that can help maybe alleviate the anxiety, the depression, the PTSD they're suffering. Maybe even try to reverse a suicide tendency or the unliving tendencies that they're having. Maybe that could be it. But we do have this program because we do believe, like what you're saying, is like guys need that kind of bonding. I think that is something essential that's been ripped from us. We are a communal species. I mean,
Well,
humans are not meant to live alone.
examine the male high school. Just when you talk about males with all their friends and buddies going to parties and being very connected, and then they kind of get pushed into the whole, not pushed in, but necessarily they get the workload. I work two jobs. My social life is dead. It's not happening. One of them's overnight shift. I'm basically asleep while everyone else is out living life and stuff like that. But are kind of go like, okay, well, some people have kids at my age, 26, and they're working two jobs, sometimes three jobs. Their only friend is their wife, and that's not necessarily a friend, that's a companion. So the loneliness factor has to be, I mean, it's probably multifactorial, but what have you seen across the loneliness factor being just the high prevailing thing that causes all these other things like depression, like all these kind of suicide things, alcoholism? I mean, someone can drink from a bottle and next thing you know all their bad feelings turn into good feelings. We don't have anything that's easier than that for them to go towards, especially after a long day of work. It's hard to get up and get back out of the house and go want to do things with friends when you know you got to be up in 5 hours.
Yeah. The well, what was your original question? Just so I don't want to like
Loneliness
not address.
being a factor. I mean, if you look at high school people and males in particular in high school, they are all very connected with their friends, and all those friends kind of just drop off when they enter the workforce.
Yeah, it happens in college too. Whatever happened in high school, they'll lose that, but they'll form some new bonds in college. And I tell my students, I'm like, hey, you're junior, senior. I just want to tell you right now, this is a marshmallow world, and you're enjoying it. I'm glad you're having this experience. But once you get out of here, it gets pretty tough. This friends you have tend to dissipate. You maybe keep in contact in 5 years, maybe one person, because the rest are going to get families, are going to go to grad school or med school, doing their thing, So and I had the same conversation, like you lose the connection. Now, generally, if you look at men, and this is my experience and so I've been teaching in front of a college classroom since 2007. So I have some years under my belt. Literally thousands of students have come to my classrooms at some, like literally thousands. I used to remember every single name and face, but that far gone idea. About 10 years ago, that stopped being the case. But what I've noticed is even though guys have their circle, perhaps, if it's outside of a fraternity, again, this is my experience and what I've noticed is that they don't tend to kind of run around in large packs. I've seen females more so do that. Again, there's room for like anecdotes and outliers and this and that. I'm talking generally across almost 20 years of observation. This is my 17 years speaking here. My experience could be different from this person or that person, but I'm speaking about myself. That I've noticed that men congregate in smaller packs, if at all. I've noticed that there's a lot more solitary males than females. This is observed from my looking at classroom behavior where they're sitting there by themselves, just like this in the chair, or like this.
They call that toxic masculinity.
They leave, exactly. They don't converse. I see a lot more of like, hey, how are you? What's going on? This is our group work. Let's exchange numbers. Let's among females than men. I run a research organization through my academia, and I'm not joking you. I research testicular cancer, balls, And that's like probably one of the most male things you could possibly have, if not the most male thing. And the vast majority of my research assistants are female. The highest performing people, not just like in my research organization, like my assistant director is a female. Her understudies are female. I have like maybe out of 40 total students, six that are men, seven that are men. And out of those seven, there's probably like two or three that would probably get to be, they're just being outpaced. They're just being like they're just being lapped. And that happens in the classroom as well. It does vary by major, but I mean, the guys in my class, many of them are just there. They're just part of the scenery. They don't really participate a lot. Again, my experience. There's gonna be someone there like, well, it's my experience. Okay. Um, and I'm not like I'm a men's health researcher. I want to see men and women, of course. I have two girls. I have a wife. I have a female dog. Like this is not a zero-sum game. I want everyone to be cool. But like I want to see men succeed. I want to see men excel. But we're not seeing that. Like anecdotally, I'm not experiencing that. Guys are not raising their hand. Guys are not really being assertive. Guys are not in the front of the classroom. Guys are in the back. They're in a corner. They're like this. They're like this. They're quiet. They don't assert themselves. They don't talk. They don't share their experiences. They don't converse. The top performers are not men. Generally, they're not. In my classes, it's mainly females that are like the excellent students, wow, they're going to be a great doctor someday. They're going to be a great practitioner. They're going to be a great person someday when it comes to their career. There are way, way, way fewer guys that do that. Now, back it up with data. Look at any data. There's a ton of data coming out now about how men, and this relates to mental health. It really does, because we're not being told to express ourselves and feel worthy. We're kind of told like we're already operating at a detriment, at a deficit. And for us to feel positive and assertive, that's hard because we're already starting, like we're already on the defensive of how we're raised. And so it's hard for us to catch up. But there's a lot of data coming out and about male student success. There's task force being formed across all major universities. At UCF, there is one. It's called the Student Success Council. And part of the agenda, it's there. It's not the primary, but it's there. It's male student success. Because nationwide, men are, they call it ARPGs, acceptance, retention, progression, graduation. Yeah, AARPGs, acceptance, retention, progression, graduation rates. Men are not really getting accepted into colleges as much. Men are not being retained. They're not progressing, and they're not graduating at the same level as women. They're dropping out in their second year. If they do finish, or taking 6 years to finish instead of 3 or 4. They don't have like that buy-in factor. They kind of feel like malaise. They're not really tied into it again. And I'm like, I thought it was just me experiencing this with these guys in this classroom, but it's not. This is like nationwide data that are driving these actions upon all these universities now. They're trying to figure out like, hey, like what's going on? First, it was kind of like, it's an anomaly, but like, no, this is like decades of experience of like guys' graduation rates kind of going like this downward spiral compared to females that are going up. And it does vary by major, of course, but like there are some fields, like my fields, like health sciences, it's like 70-30 split, women and male and men. And I think it's getting a bit wider now, but generally across the whole board, men are not graduating. They're not progressing. They're not being retained. They're just kind of falling through the cracks. And a lot of it is like how maybe it is their disposition towards mental health. Maybe they don't feel engaged. Maybe they don't feel loved. They don't feel like they're being seen and heard. Maybe they're trying to fight against something. Maybe they're swimming. They feel like they're swimming against the current, and they are.
Well, if the battle's not on the field, if they're not expressing themselves, and how much of the battle is in their own head, how can you focus when you're dealing with all those problems? I mean, if you look at the number of drop-off rates between males in college institutions, you have them picking higher risk jobs, the jobs that will accept them, road work, construction. Look at how much your lifespan is cut in half when you pick a high-risk job like that. You have people that die at 30, 40, even younger ages than that. And most of them are dominant fields especially in the workforce like that with construction, are males. I have friends that are girls that are construction workers, and they'll tell you, "Oh, it's largely men. It's a largely men field." Doesn't mean toxic masculinity. It's just that's the only job they can get because they had so much going on in their mind when they should have been paying attention in school to get a better job. And that was the only thing they could really pick, make money, because they had to drop out of college because they couldn't afford the tuition and they had to take care of their family. I mean, a lot of people weren't given those options to be able to enjoy or try and do their hardest when it comes to studying. That's why so many kids now are being pushed towards studying, which I don't think it necessarily is the answer either. I just think we have to create a more balanced approach when we talk about really discussing how we treat equality between men and women in this country and any other country out there. But let's focus on the United States.
Yeah. Well, you know what the most dangerous job is out there? Cell phone tower repair workers.
That's dangerous as hell, man. You got to climb all
Think
the way up
about, you ever
there.
look at those cell phone towers? Those like that little ladder, that's like a foot wide. And they got that's like, yeah, man. It's like the highest mortality rate, cell phone tower repair worker. It's pretty brutal. Like you don't think about it, but yeah, but construction, mining, that kind of stuff. Yeah. But it's male dominated jobs. But there is this, but going back to the main point about this male mental health is we're seeing it manifesting the poor or the negative mental health. We're seeing it manifesting outcomes in different ways. I think the issue of the higher rates of suicide, the the male issues when it comes to success in higher education, just like the aggressive behaviors, like the mass tragedy events. I think these are all symptoms of something larger. And we have to go way upstream to figure that out. And I really do think it's the way that we're putting these guys on a path of manhood the second they're born. We are, even to our, best intention, like, well, you know, guys should probably do this and guys should do that. And like, maybe, but let's just at least have pause to think about, well, maybe he does want to do that. Maybe we shouldn't think that. Like, I wanted so bad to be in a band, like when I was a kid, so bad. I love Miles Davis and I always wanted to be a trumpetist. And I always wanted to play drums too, just like, Gene Krupa. And I was never allowed. It was like it wasn't a manly thing. You had to play sports. You couldn't go in a band. If you go in a band, you're gonna be a band kid. And back then I was like, yeah, you're right. Now I think back, I'm like, how messed up is that? Like, that's so messed up. Like we're judging the value of a person, of this young man, based upon what his interests are. I'm like, I didn't decide to like drums. I just like drums. I want to be a trumpetist. I didn't want to play football. I hated it. Hated playing sports. I'm athletic, but I didn't like to play sports like that. I was forced to. My parents are great people, but they force you to kind of do these things because they're a product of their environment. They were cast into certain roles and they played their role almost perfectly of how they were cast. And they passed that on to me. And I'm trying to break that chain with my children. But I do find myself falling into bad habits of what I was taught as a kid, the way I talk, the way I expect things, the way I am. I'm like, thank God for my wife, Kathy, because she's like, yo, it's there. Pull back. I'm like, shit, you're right. So we have to have this like breaking the chain of like what we should be expecting these young children to be like. And I think that might solve some of these mental health issues later in life, teenage, 20, 30, beyond. And real quick, when it comes to suicide or on living, the biggest group, that's the highest at-risk group, are men over the age of 75. That's the highest on living activity group out there, men over 75.
Why specifically men over 75?
I think if their wife died, they have
Okay.
nothing to live for. They again, think about the demographic and when they were raised, 50s, 60s, and the 70s. They're a very patriarchal society. Society, not them, society. They were very like men do this, women do that. And a lot of these guys, they don't know how to wash clothes. They never turn on a washer. They don't even know how to boil water. and they're kind of helpless. Like they don't know what to do.
But they can fix your car if it breaks down in the fucking driveway.
Yeah, they could change your oil, they could change your tire, but they have no idea how to feed themselves or wash their clothes. And the thing is, like, they're tied to their wife. That's all it was, like what you said. That's their life. They have no social circle out of that. Like after the wife, after the kids leave or something, they have nothing left. They're just like despondent afterwards. They're just like lonely, isolated. So gone. It's men over 75. And I would hypothesize that it's when they're a widower, widower, whatever. When their companion died. I think that's when you'll see the highest chance of that. Like I have people in my family that are like, oh yeah, if if she died before me, I'd end it all. I'm like, why? You have people depending on you. He's like, I'd end it all. I'm like, you shouldn't think like that. Like, but you hear that, and it's kind of sad.
What about how much of this area of male mental health or just mental health in general has been impacted, whether it's good or bad, when it comes to commercialization of cannabis use? I mean, are you an advocate for it? I tend to be on the middle road on that. Like I see that I like to talk about the negatives and the positives of it. But I've noticed that like a lot of my friends, and there's a thing that really doesn't get talked about when it comes to cannabis use, is that a lot of people, like you talk to these guys 20 years after they've been smoking cannabis, they go, I feel like my life's been on freeze. And I'm like, yeah, it makes the bad feelings go away, but it's just like drinking. Next thing you know, the day's over, and next thing you know, it's been 20 years. And I don't know if that's what you want to live because you haven't really changed your social circles. You haven't went out to try and find friends. You're in the same spot you were 20 years ago, but you might have had some good cartoons you got to be able to watch or some good laughs and memories with some friends. That's very, very important. A lot of people still cling on to
Some
those things
family
from high
swim on the
school.
Cartoon Network. I used to
Yeah.
love watching that stuff, but um, with so I think anything ranging from cannabis to alcohol to porn to whatever, a lot of it is when people, just say men, engage in that, a lot of it is to suppress something, to medicate something, to kind of deal with something. I heard Steve-O from, Jackass. He said, and God, I used to watch him in college and high school, and he's actually a very, you wouldn't think it, but he's actually a pretty high level thinking dude.
Yeah.
He was recently on a podcast. I forget, maybe it was his own, or I forget who, but he was talking about his past drug and alcohol usage. And again, related to male mental health, is that he's like, it's not the drinking and drugs that's the disease. I'm like, interesting. He's like, it's not my use of that, or not my past use of that was the problem. He's like, that was a symptom or my attempt to deal. That was a symptom of what I was really dealing with. He's like, I felt uncomfortable in my own skin. I felt alone and isolated, and I didn't like who I was. I was always, and I'm paraphrasing, but that's what the gist was. He's like, I was uncomfortable in my own skin. And I was like, man, that's right. That guy's deep about that. I was like, that's right. We are uncomfortable in who we are. We don't like who we are. That's why there is male muscle dysmorphia, like that muscle dysmorphia disorder, like eating disorders in men, the whole muscle thing. That's why we feel depressed and anxious because we don't feel comfortable in who we are. So we turn to these vices. And he was saying that he didn't feel comfortable who he was. He didn't like who he was. He was isolated and alone. And so he did drugs and alcohol to deal with that, to make it bearable. I'm like, damn. So I don't, I'm not an advocate of using drugs, alcohol, porn, or anything like that to kind of like mask the underlying. Porn, I'm anti because not because I'm anti-sex or anything like that. It's because I see the detriment in like pornography and how it's affecting young men and young females too, but like young men particularly. There are some whatever positive you could find out of that, fine. There are an overwhelming amount of negatives that come from like pornography usage, but I'm not a prude. I'm not saying that. But anyway, besides that, when it comes to cannabis, like I'm not trying to hide anything. I'm very open with my past drug use. Like I used to smoke pot in college and it was fine. I never like I was never a wake and baker kind of a thing. Because what you said is like you did see the pothead and how they acted, like the Beavis and Butthead type people, like the more like the Butthead type, you know, the like they kind of seem like this like low key buzz all the time, but they didn't seem energetic. They seem like lethargic. They seem like a little bit like detached. They seem like life just goes
Unambitious.
by. Yeah, it's just like this malaise. I was like, I don't know about that. Like, I don't mind like smoking a joint with you and just having a good time around a couple of beers and like playing Metal Gear. This is going back in the day, playing Metal Gear Solid or playing Madden or something like that. On our PlayStation ones. This is again going back
Being
from
sociable
2000.
with it
Yeah,
is a
exactly.
positive. Yeah.
Yeah, and like so, I haven't done it in a long time, just because I just don't really have the opportunity nor the real desire to anymore. But like I'm not anti-cannabis like when it comes to like gummies or like dealing with like like microdosing or if you're dealing with chemotherapy issues or whatever that just a little bit to kind of get you over the edge. Like I'm not opposed to that at all. Like I don't think there's anything different between taking a gummy at a certain percentage or a certain milligram or whatever and or taking like your oxy. I mean, I'd rather you chew a pineapple flavored cannabis gummy bear than you take an Oxycontin. Like I would rather that because it helps you deal with it. It's a little bit, at least in my opinion, a little bit more of a positive kind of a thing. More of a, I guess, salutogenic way. It's not really pathogenic. Like I don't like opioid use is so uh, that's tough to get into. But now, if you're gonna like start abusing it, like taking like 10 gummies a day and just trying to be completely buzzed all the time, that's where there's a problem with it. That's my personal opinion about it.
Well, it's because you're numbing something. You're not trying to feel whatever you're suppressing.
Like if you're taking a gummy, just kind of micro, say, that kind of hurts your left.
Yeah.
What? Fine, dude, just go on, be fine. But like when you're like constantly, like you're around your kids, like just like buzz and like just out of your mind, that's a problem right there. But a lot of guys turn to that stuff, not just for cannabis, but all other vices too. They try to numb, they try to escape, and that's the problem. And we need to be more responsible. But again, though it takes like this higher level thought. Not like you have to be intelligent, you got to go train to be a PhD. All that's bullshit anyway. I'm telling you right now, I'm a PhD, I'm in the academy, but I'll tell you what, like I have known a lot of people that, I'm like, you're teaching children? That's kind of weird. But like, I'm not one of those traditional ivory towered academics. Like, it just takes patience and planning. Anybody can get a PhD. I'm not discounting it. It's hard to do, but with patience and planning, if you put your mind to it, you can get it done. So don't think of the PhD after name that someone's like this Buddha type person. It's not like that. Um, some of the people that my dad was an auto parts salesman. Some of the mechanics that I worked with when I was in high school, some of the most intelligent people that I know, and they had GEDs. It's like the life experience. It was that higher emotional intelligence where something that they saw life from the other side. Besides consumption, they saw life from production side. It wasn't just like I'm going to consume life. Blah, blah, blah. There was like I have a family to provide for. I'm going to produce life. They saw that production side of life instead of the consumption side, and that allowed them to kind of develop mentally, this emotionally. And I learned so much from the people like that, like the salt of the earth kind of people that were highly emotionally intelligent. I learned more from them than I did PhDs that I work with and were trained by. It's like this higher emotional intelligence that's like those street smarts kind of a thing. I think a lot of guys lack the street smarts. They lack the emotional intelligence because we were not given the opportunity to develop that. I don't think we're given the responsibilities of having an overnight job like you and having two jobs or learning to kind of like do this stuff. Like I don't think a lot of young guys are actually pushed to that. I don't think we're given opportunities for men to kind of spread their wings and kind of be explorative and kind of develop themselves. We just kind of like ignore them and they manifest in so many bad ways because of that.
Can I ask what your opinion is or thoughts on toxic masculinity, just the term and how it's kind of entered really? I know it's kind of a heavy topic there, but it's the only way that we've ever really talked about mental health when it comes to men, or any slight that any men have really gotten besides one of those mass hysteria events or something of that sort. It seems like toxic masculinity comes up, but I think people just need to reframe it. We need to stop looking at it like these are guys purposely trying to be toxic and evil. And there are probably some out there, 100%. But a lot of it is people that are hiding their own pain, and that's the way that they've used to mask their pain. You know, when we talk about someone who has a giant biker jacket and giant bicycle that's obnoxiously loud, I mean, it might be cool to them. Some people like that stuff, but they're doing a lot of that because there is this male masculine culture that we have that pushes guys to act certain ways. It doesn't mean that they're just all abusive and all these aggressors. It's that they're hiding pain. And we've never really looked at it from that angle. We've only seen it from male aggressors.
Now, there are, so I don't, there's not a masculinity. There's masculinities. It's plural. And again, how we define the social construct of masculinity is very, if not singular, it's not very multi-dimensional. It's like you're one of like four types of guys usually in society. I don't know what those four types are. I'm making that number up, but it's very, very little. But the thing is, though, bro, it's like, and I just like sexuality. I don't think anything's really yes or no, straight or gay. I don't think anything is like man or woman. I think there's a lot of like variation. I've learned that over the years. I think we're somewhere on the spectrum for everything. And just me living life and kind of experiencing different people, like I'm like, yeah, man, I think there's a lot of like variation in how we express ourselves. And it could be different times of the day and whatever. But so the toxic masculinity thing, I like to use a term. Now, this is always a touchy subject, but so there are the people out there, like, I don't know if you can name names on here. Can you name names on here?
If you want.
Okay. So like the Andrew Tates, um, the uh the Epsteins, the Weinsteins, people like that. Um, but the more the Andrew Tate type people, like there, I'm like, it's like almost a cartoon, it's a caricature of like these guys. Like there was one video I saw him like where they branded his steak with his initials. He like smoking this huge ass cigar, shirts off. He had like a crown or some shit on, like a Liver King kind of thing. And like you roll your eyes, you're like, oh my God, like what is this? This is like a cartoon character. It's a caricature of like what this guy man should be. And they play their role perfectly. You know what I mean? Like I don't agree with anything they're saying, really saying, but like they play their role pretty perfectly. Like in what they want to portray. I mean, he has Bugattis, he has these things. I mean, he's on house arrest now in Romania, but still, like, but you know, when I look at that, I'm like, that would, if I had a label or point to something that's toxic masculinity, it'd be how he acts. Now, that term is a blanket term now on it's being used to define a lot of things, which I don't think is toxic masculinity, how Andrew Tate exercises it, if we had to put a name to it. I do think that a lot of things that men do, well, let me say this, there's a lot of toxic things that men and women do, but we're way more apt to label toxic things that men do just way easier than women do. But I'm not going to go into that. But so the toxic masculinity term, I would, I'm not opposed to using it. I would just urge people to give pause to what they're labeling as that. Um, I'm not saying to use this term instead of toxic masculinity, but I tend to use the phrase like messy human behaviors. And messy can mean damaging too. So there's variations to what I'm talking about. Like I'm not trying to downplay aggressive sex, domestic violence, you know, just misogyny, that kind of, I'm not downplaying that. That is ridiculous and we should not be doing this kind of stuff. But when I say messy human behaviors, it's the, you know, the broing it up, the high-fiving, the drunk young guy yelling, you know, beating his chest, the guy's fighting. I'm like, is that toxic masculinity? I don't know. Is it messy human behaviors? Probably. Um, it, even if we label something toxic masculinity, okay, Got it. 10-4, roger that. But my issue is what's causing that? Like it's one thing to define it and say, naughty, naughty, naughty boys, don't you be doing that. We can't be doing that. You are now canceled. That's fine. Just pretend okay. I'll grant you that. But now what are you going to do to prevent this from happening in the future? All you're doing is canceling people for who they are and what they're doing. And I got it. Bad behavior, sure, got it. You need to deal with that. And if there are issues where they're harming other people, sure, that needs to be dealt with appropriately. But those people that tend to use that term very loosely. They really don't have a plan to address that issue, not just with current men, but younger men that are in the pipeline to exhibit these toxic behaviors. They're not doing anything about that. They're not really advocating for more money to expand connection programs. They're not really there working with men that are 12 and 13 that are starting to get a little bit more aggressive and sexual and with stuff. They're not really there with them. They're ignoring them. They're not in the streets with them. They're not in the bedrooms with them. That'd be weird. Scratch. They're not like with them, teaching them like, hey, there are better ways to express these things. They're not there with them, working with them. So they're upstream, they're downstream, like labeling people, canceling people, condemning men, saying you're toxic, who you are, the future is female. Like I hate that term. When a young guy hears that the future is female, what does that guy want to do then? He's gonna be like, what do I have to lose? I'm not even part of the future, so I'm just going to indulge in what I already am. So we have to work with these guys. It's one thing to call out idiocy and bad behavior and crimes. Yes, call it out, deal with it appropriately, but also provide some like remedial things to help prevent this in the future. Working with men, thinking of new ways for them to show up in the world, rehumanizing them, if that sounds a little bit weird, but you have to also provide remedies, not just canceling people. And so that's a long answer to that. It's just a touchy subject, but like, I'm not really a huge fan of just calling it out. I want you to call it out, but also provide solutions. So,
I would like to define the word more and then be able to work outside of those parameters if I was going to ask you the question, which is the biggest question, but how do we start addressing and having steps moving forward to getting the male mental health back on track to the point where it doesn't enter, oh, that guy's just being a toxic masculine man by wanting to complain about his problems and demand somebody listen to him. I'm like, well, for the God's sakes, most men don't get anything unless they're demanding something or they're screaming it or they're doing an abrasive action. I hate to say it like that, but that's most of the times the case. A lot of things falls on deaf ears, and the sad thing is they don't push when they're addressing their feelings or something and something comes up. Well, hang on, before you go into that, let me talk about this. They'll be like, okay, and then it'll never get brought up again. And next thing you know, they're going to the liquor store and buying a bottle of alcohol. It's not necessarily a toxic masculine thing. So I want to define that and separate how do we get things going forward with just either better education on the topic, a better discussion, a healthier discussion. How do we get men to start looking at themselves and be like, hey, it's okay to sit in your car for an hour and listen to music. It's okay to feel something and not wonder why you're feeling it, or maybe I should push this away and get out of my car and run a lap or something. It doesn't need to be like that.
yeah. I can't define toxic masculinity because it's just been usurped and used by so many people. Like I don't even know how to define it. Again, like if I had to define it, I'd say just see Andrew Tate and that just like whatever he does, that's kind of like what toxic masculinity is. Like the whole misogynist stuff, like hyper aggressive, like that. But like I have a hard time even with that because I really can't define it. It's like defining the word blue. Like how do you define a
Well, you
color?
already defined it. It's just about now we talk about the parameters of how we make sure that we don't step inside that toxic masculine thing. We actually focus on men that are generally trying to just make themselves happier and not feel ashamed for doing that.
Well, if there's kind of round this out, what I'd probably say is in order for us to kind of like air quote, big air quotes, deal with this, we have to acknowledge the fact that the guys that are produced, like me, you, whatever, we already are traumatized. All right. We already are playing a certain role that we were cast into when we were young. And we're, and in many ways, that role is being reinforced still. Subtle marketing, products that were being, that are being marketed to us. Like you would never see some guy wearing bright red flowy pants out there with platform shoes and like a tank top, but that would not be abnormal for a female. Like we just have these things that we can't do because of this social judgment that we're going to get. And that's fine. Like, so we are born, so we have to acknowledge the fact that the men that exist now have been traumatized and we have been typecasted and we are in kind of like in a cattle chute of like how we operate. Maybe we don't want to be that way, but it's so ingrained now in our DNA that it's hard for us to kind of operate out of. And that's okay. We should tell guys it's okay to feel the way you're feeling. Like it's okay to you acknowledge your uncomfortability. We should acknowledge that and really own it and get that out and tell people that you're uncomfortable or something's bothering you. So again, I'd probably say whoever exists now has been traumatized. Fine. And that is why I say we are constantly, well, that trauma comes from some sort of typecasting that we were put in when we were younger. And it's constantly still being reinforced, although it's changing, it's still being reinforced in more subtle ways, but in still some very overt ways. It's still kind of reinforcing what we feel. Now, what I'd say then is to these guys that like myself and you that already exist, like back to this, like, hey, I know you feel a little bit like there's like some tension about how you feel and how society wants you to feel, about what you want to be, about how society wants you to be. I know that you wanted to be a trumpetist, but you're not. I know that you were told you can't because that's gay. So do you got to deal with that? It's okay to express that feeling. It's okay to feel that way. But now, healthily, how do we move forward? Then I'd probably say, now, for these guys to move forward after they kind of like learn to acknowledge how they're feeling, we should offer them the ability to join social clubs that are outside of drinking and sports clubs. That's what the whole Connect program does. I didn't want to really include sports or drinking involved in any of this stuff because I think guys get enough of that. The only time that guys get together are around a pint of beer or around some basketball game or something like that. I want them to kind of connect around down dog or like shavasana poses or something outside of some what they've been cast to like. And so it's okay for you to seek therapy or seek connection in different ways. It's okay for you to like find fulfillment in things that before you were not really keen to want to gravitate towards because of social kind of admonish or admonish. And so, and then I'd probably say after that's been established, it's going to be really hard. You got to work with young guys, the guys that are coming through the pipeline now, like the 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11-year olds. Get them early about connecting with each other, like being kind to one another, being empathetic, showing love, like conversing, not like, beating your chest, like I got to hit a home run here. Like being supportive of each other, like just rewiring what we expect guys to be. There's a couple step process, but that's what I think it would take. It'd be a huge undertaking for guys, for society to change, for us to feel comfortable and make a more positive mental health. But we have to acknowledge that we've been traumatized and it's probably never going to go away. We just have to think of different ways to deal with it. I told my wife this morning, my trauma will never go away, but it used to be like the sound of a car alarm going off. But now it's like kind of like a little bit of a buzzer, like a shaver in the background. Like I can still hear it. It's not so loud where I'm kind of like, ugh. I can still hear it, but it's tolerable. We have to get that from car alarm to electric shaver, like where it's never going to go away, but you can deal with now. And that we have to deal with. That should be something that we work towards with the older guys. Well, the younger guys, we got to kind of get them a little bit more rewired, like allow them to be a trumpetist, allow them to kind of like be in Boy Scouts or learn connection or be empathetic, volunteer or something outside of like put your uniform on, go out there and kick ass. You know, you're gonna get that kind of dude. And do you want that? Maybe, but probably not. It's kind of cool when they're hitting a home run and they're being aggressive out there, but when they carry the aggression home and they're like, then you have a problem with it. I was like, you got to learn how to navigate this. You can't just like preach like one way. There's got to be like multi ways to kind of like develop these young men, and I do think we got to revisit that. So again, sorry for a long answer to that, but it's just a very complicated issue.
What would you say when it comes to being optimistic about the future when we're talking about mental health in general and even male mental health? Do you think there's going to be a little bit more kind of reconciliation on the subject matter? It seems like a lot more people are more focused, especially the younger generations, and asking their friends if they're okay, which I think is important.
Yeah, things are changing for sure. Like you see expression in men differently now. Back when, I mean, again, I'm old enough to kind of see decades pass and how trends pass, and I see a market change in how guys express themselves and what guys are getting involved with and what's acceptable by society. Like things are definitely changing. I mean, 100 years ago to today, it's like two different planets. Like what can happen? And most of that change happened in the past 50 years, you know, and even the past 20 years, it's been exponentially different. In the past 10 years, it's been really different with the advent of iPhones and stuff like that, or 15 years. I mean, change is happening at faster and faster paces. Most of it's good. Some of it's kind of like, are we really prepared to adjust that quickly? I don't know. That's the debate to be had. But I do see that things are kind of easing up a bit. But it's like compounding interest that's been happening with guys for so long, like my age and older, where yeah, change is happening, but we're still stuck back in 1989, 1955, 1976, and how things used to be. Like I'm a kid from the 80s and 90s, and a lot of shit that went on back then, that sticks with you. Like it was brutal. People always laugh about who's better, LeBron or Michael Jordan. Jordan always goes back to it was a different game back in the 90s. And it was way more aggressive. Bill Lambier would elbow you right in the face. Like to play against Rodman, I mean, that he was a brutal man, like to play with. He was a rebounding king. You would get elbows to the ribs, like just brutal, like UFC kind of stuff. Now, I mean, you fart in the wrong direction, you're gonna foul. But that could translate to society. Back in the 90s, it was pretty brutal to be a young man. It was brutal. It was like, I would never want to live that again back about you because they told you what you can be, what you want to do. You had to act a certain way.
They
And
took rollerblades from us.
yeah, I could never rollerblade because that was a
Nobody could.
female thing. If I put a pair of roller skates on, I'd be literally be punched in the face. Like that was never a thing. I could never, ever, ever. And last time I wore skates, I was like in fourth grade and I would never put them on again because you'd just be made fun of. Like, I'm like, that is so ridiculous. Like, why is it like this? Like roller skates. Even now, I imagine myself putting them on. Like, God, no way. I'm like, but if you took it and looked at it objectively, it's so ridiculous. Like, it's ridiculous that we even think this way. But again, that would never get out of my head. I could be as learned as possible with 8 PhDs and this and that and work and what. But for me, I would never put on a pair of roller skates or, rollerblades because it'd be so ridiculous in my head. I would never do it. And that's the bind we're in as men. Like you're just it's in your DNA to act a certain way. And like no matter how hard you try, you kind of fall back on bad habits. Some are sillier than others, like rollerblades or not, but some are more serious, like gender roles. Like people are pretty adamant about it.
It leaked over to scooters too when they started. Guys can't really ride scooters. But one thing that it never hit, everyone still enjoys that bro movie Top Gun when they're volleyballing with
Yeah,
their
dude.
shirts off. And I'm like,
Yeah, man.
hang on a second. That would fit the exact definition if we were talking about it. But you're talking about rollerblades, is it?
It's a very sexualized scene. People don't think about that. It's a very it's almost homoerotic. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm not. I think sexuality, everyone's on the spectrum somewhere, but it's a very homoerotic scene. And guys are like, yeah, bro, danger zone. I'm like, there's guys with their shirts off in the sun playing volleyball. It's pretty sexualized, not in a bad way, might be a good way. I don't know what you're into, but if you're into it, good, awesome. But like it's a pretty highly sexual scene. Like I think so.
But it doesn't take away my ability to ride roller skates.
Exactly. Exactly. But you can't wear rollerblades because I don't know why. If that was a scene full of females playing like that, guys would be like, oh my God, did you see that scene? It was so hot. I'm like, it's the same thing with guys with their shirts off. I don't know what the difference is. It's you just don't see it. But you're right. It's you won't see that as like being like sexualized, but you can't wear roller skates. I mean, it's just so silly, like what we do and how we raise guys. Like it's absurd almost. It's absolutely absurd. Like you can't go out to a restaurant and get the ladies cut, the smaller 8-ounce steak, even though you're not hungry.
Oh, dude, I'll still order a pina colada. I don't give a damn. That's my favorite drink. I go to the
Me
bar and
too,
do that.
man. I'll order a fucking pink drink. I would love it. I'll order a salad for dinner with grilled chicken. Not a problem. I'll order an 8-ounce steak, but like there's some guys like I can't even order that. Give me they're not give me the 24-ounce T-bone. I'm like, why? Why do you want to get like why? Just because? Like it's just absurd. It's very absurd. And it's silly to think about, and we kind of chuckle about it, but like think about the after effects of this. Think about guys, how they suffer. Like some guys just maybe want to wear a pair of high heels. Maybe they do want to wear a pashmina. Maybe they do want to paint their nails, but you can't. They're not doesn't mean that they're, homosexual or something like that. They just want to wear a pair of high heels. Like some of the pants my wife, I'm like, man, those pants look flowy and comfortable. I could never wear that. I got to wear these nut crunching jeans. But like, you could wear flowy pants. That's awesome. I'm jealous of you. You know what I mean? Like maybe I want to wear that, but you can't. It's just it's
Plus, if you're in the gym culture, it's surprising you'll see a lot more men that compliment guys on their physique, and it's like that's honestly what they really need. A lot of people get sick of it, but it's like, dude, to be honest, it's like most guys are looking for a compliment anywhere they can fucking take it.
dude, we're all the same. It just we're all the same. We're if I had to quote Succession, the show, loved it. Great show. Um, what was the daughter's name? I forget her character's name. Um, my God, what the hell's her name? Anyway, she had a great quote, and I say it to this day. She's like, all we are people in rooms trying to be happy, trying to find happiness. I'm like, God, you're right. That's so depressingly correct. We're people in rooms trying to be happy. I'm like, that's all, and we're all the same. It doesn't matter if you're a Kardashian or you're some this displaced man on the street paneling for money. We're just people in rooms trying to find happiness. I'm like, man, that really equals a playing field. And that's all we are. And for guys, it's hard for us to find happiness because sometimes we don't even have a room because no one really accepts us, and we don't have anyone to talk to. So it's hard for us to find happiness. But
Well, people out there like yourself are at least talking about it and also creating programs and groups and organizations to be able to help out guys and bring them together in a spot, which I really, really appreciate. So I wanted to have you back on again because not a lot of people are talking about male mental health or just advocacy in the male mental health area. But is there a place where people can find your links and any other things you'd like to promote?
yeah, sure. Again, we're the Male Wellness Collective. Our Insta handle is at Male Wellness Collective. The website's malewellnesscollective.com. It's pretty synonymous, Male Wellness Collective. Uh, yeah, and we're on Insta. We're, mainly on Instagram. But our website's pretty active too. But you can find us there. My academic work, you can just kind of Google UCF. I'm at the University of Central Florida, UCF, Rovito. You can see some of the work I've done with cancer survivors. So I'm trying to humanize their experience too. A lot of these cancer survivors, they'll get through chemo and they'll kind of ring the bell like they got cured. But like, what's the after effect? Like with testicular cancer, it's like, yeah, you're cured, but then they let you go. But the problem is like you have a lifetime of issues with like hearing, cardiotoxicity, depression. Like a lot of these guys that are on these multi rounds of chemo and radiation, particularly the chemotherapy, this platinum-based chemotherapy, they have like anxiety issues, depression for life. They're like riddled with issues, and the people don't treat that. They're like, ring the bell, you're five, you're good. And then a 5 year scan comes and it's cancer free. They're like, you're cured from cancer, maybe, but it does come back. It could, but from cancer, save that. But what about the mental health issues? What about my cardiovascular issues? What about my toxic or my peripheral neuropathy? What about my ototoxicity where I can't hear anything anymore? What about my impotence issues? What about my social issues where I feel like less of a man? They don't treat that though. You're cured from cancer, but not the other ills. And so my work deals with that afterwards. We have to be kind to one another. We have to like humanize people and realize that we're not working with numbers or others. We're working with people that are just like you, that have families, that feel, that have emotions, and we have to kind of just be better. And I think that would help cure a lot of different things. But I appreciate the opportunity to come on and talk here, man. Anytime.
It's a pleasure to have you back on the show. I'm going to link all your links in the description. People will be able to click, and hopefully, I'll have you back on earlier than 2 years just to be able to talk about some of the work you've done with people who have beaten cancer and the problems that they still face long term.
Would
But
love to do that.
thank you again for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank. Stay tuned for our next episode.